Okay, it looks like we are live. So good evening, everybody. Sorry we're running just a few minutes late, but I will go ahead and call to order this special session of the Auburn City Council June 25th. If you would all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have us all here, so I will go ahead and ask City Clerk if she would please take the roll.
Councilmember Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Amara.
Present.
Mackey.
Here.
Oakley.
Here.
And Mayor Berlant.
And I am here. We have a quorum. Great. Moving on to the consent calendar. I'm going to go ahead and pull this item from the consent calendar for discussion. So if we could just start, I think there may be some questions, but start with the city manager, who maybe you can just give us a little bit of background, Bob, you or staff, on what this is, where it's going, and then if there are any council members that have questions or the public, we can do that as well. So, Bob?
Am I on? Are you folks able to see me?
We can hear you, but I cannot see you. There we go. Now
I do.
We see.
I've got the basic Zoom screen. Okay, my apologies because I can't see you folks at all. However, this is an item with the Arts Commission over the last at least 2 years. This particular project has been brought forward year in, year out for them to try to complete. It was estimated to be a $20,000 infrastructure project at the art park. They they'd gone out to bid. They had got contractors within the dollar amount. And then several months ago, that fell through. They went back out to bid and came in at twice the amount. So from my perspective, I felt the project was probably over. April Maynard then kept working on the project, looking to get additional funding. She was able to get the additional $20,000 increment from the Downtown Business Association. And this is the item. This item is to allow you to accept those funds, and they can then be deposited in the Arts Commission budget for future work on that project.
So Bob, just so if I understand, the project, has it already been approved? Remind me, because we have talked about it at the City Council.
Yes.
Already approved at the Planning Commission and with City Council?
It is a fully approved project.
Gotcha. Okay. Looks like Councilwoman Dowden Calvillo, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So I do remember when this project came before the Planning Commission and we approved it. And then it was included in the work plan that was submitted by the Arts Commission in the budget documents that we just considered, Monday? I believe the total price was about $38,000. So $20,000 is definitely, more than a drop in a bucket to help fund this. My question really is, I just want to ensure that the Arts Commission does have a reserve fund, which is separate from the other committees. They don't have reserve funds. The purpose of that reserve fund is for dedicated monies like this, as well as, I believe, the revenue that they generate at their events, like when they had the Garden Park concert series and so forth. So this money, just to confirm, Bob, would be deposited in that reserve account, correct? So that the council won't be taking that money out inadvertently if we needed to do budget cuts. Is that correct?
Yeah, it will remain there. Currently, they have about $58,000 in their account. If it's not used, it will all go to fund balance on July 1st.
But they have that reserve account that has about $9,000.
That's a separate account, and that has about $9,500 in it.
So would this $20,000 go to that account? It seems like
that would be fine. We can do it either way. If you're comfortable with that, that's the way it will go.
Yeah, because then when it's in that reserve account, then the council can't inadvertently take it out and use it for something else, later down the road. And so
Makes
I
sense.
just didn't know if that in the resolution or when we talked about the account number, added to 45,111, if that was correct or not. So, okay, well, that was the only question that I really had.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Mackey.
I understand that it went out to bid the first time, came back lower because they didn't bid it as a prevailing wage project. Is that true, Bob?
That might be the case. That's quite a ways back. It was not prevailing wage. Then they went back out to prevailing wage. They got those bids, and then those fell through ultimately. And then they finally got the new bids, which came up to almost 40,000.
That's what I
Okay.
remember, Councilwoman Mackey, was that the initial bids were not prevailing wage. I remember that just reviewing through some of this documentation, so. being the
And
case.
I just want to make one last comment. It would be over April Maynard's dead body that she would let us take that money, that $20,000 away from the art park budget. So I don't think we have to worry about that, Alice.
I just want to make sure it's in the right fund so that it
Of
doesn't
course.
inadvertently get moved out. And if we did like let's slice everybody in half, their budget, that's all. I get what you're
Right.
saying, but it
I
just
understand.
protects it there because who knows when they're going to actually be able to access it and utilize it. So,
Let's hope so. Let's hope soon.
I
yes.
appreciate you having allowing us to have the discussion this evening. It was important to the Arts Commission that we accept this dollars on their behalf so that they can put it towards their project and use the dollars that become available next fiscal year to get moving. So that's the reason that I did add it to tonight's calendar. There was a little sense from their sense of urgency to get it into their account as well. So appreciate that. Any other questions from the council? Yeah, Councilwoman Amara.
Yeah, okay, so it's my understanding then that they can utilize these funds along with any other funds that they have in their account. They'll be able to use the 17.5 and some of the 9,000 if they need to make up the 40. Is that so they can get going on this project? Is that correct, Bob?
That is correct.
Although we did say that the committees wouldn't have access to their money until after August as part of the budget.
Well,
I think we gave them 50% of their allocation until we come back to revisit it, is the way I thought I remember.
Yeah, we did 50%, but I thought we were also going to wait till the new city manager had a chance to talk to them all about their work plans and then we would determine whether or not we were going to give them any more, what have you. I thought that was part of the process, was that they didn't have access until August, but perhaps
since this is the project that's been ongoing, I thought that this one would be excluded and Bob could make the decision.
I thought it was unallocated funds. If they have allocated funds towards a specific project or event, that they could keep those funds, but not many of them do have. The Arts Commission would be the only one that I think probably does have. I don't know, the Endurance Committee might have some needs too but I thought we took half of it and froze it, and the rest they could access, but they had to have something allocated for. No new allocations. That's how I understood it.
Bob,
Okay.
Is that what you understood from our last meeting? Because as Councilwoman Mackey repeated, that is how I took it the way, but I want to make sure what you and Andy heard and what we approved
And it's perfect, and it's perfectly fine. I think where you're looking at the need for the new manager to kind of corral things is with a lot of the committees that have multiple projects, trying to find the new focus for the city, which way it needs to go. This has been a project that's been on the books for quite some time. You finally have some good contractors that are committed. It might be a good time to go ahead. Also, what's different here is this is a piece of infrastructure that will embellish the community for years, rather than a lot of the more transitory projects that the different committees and commissions do. So this fits a little bit differently than some of the other projects. So if it's
I'm fine with them using it ASAP. I have no problem. I just want to make sure that we didn't make a decision otherwise. I have absolutely no problem with it.
No, it's good clarification. Any other questions or comments by the council?
No.
Okay, seeing none, is there any public comment?
There is not.
Okay, great. With that, is there a motion to accept these funds?
I'll make-
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion by resolution that we authorize the city manager to accept the $20,000 from the Auburn Downtown Business Association to facilitate the building of the shade structure and the art park, and that the funds be deposited in their reserve account.
Second,
Second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. If the clerk will please take the roll.
Councilmember Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Kamara,
Yes.
Mackey,
aye.
Oakley,
yes,
and Mayor Berlant.
And I am an aye. Okay, great. The donation is accepted 5-0. That ends our consent calendar, so we'll move on to public comment. This is the time provided for the public to speak on an item that is not on this agenda, even though it's a special session. We'll take any comments because we are following the governor's executive orders due to the COVID-19 emergency. We have been accepting and are accepting public comment via public comment at auburn.ca.gov email, as well as the telephone number that was listed on the agenda. So I will ask first if there's any comments by the city council. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and ask the city clerk if there's any public comment.
There is not comment for items not on this agenda.
Okay, great. Then I will go ahead and close public comment and we will move to council business. This is item 3, calling the general municipal election, consolidating election with a general state election, requesting services of the Placer County Clerk for conduct an election, and the consideration of a transactions and use tax. So I will go ahead and turn it over to city manager, or is one of the chiefs taking the lead here?
I will be starting this off.
Okay,
And
perfect.
Mayor and City Council, this evening we will be reviewing materials that have been previously before the City Council. In addition, we'll be answering some new questions that have come before us over the past several weeks. We'll introduce the newly interested parties, both groups and individuals in public comment that want to participate in this particular public process, all of which, of course, have contacted each of you previously. And finally, we'll be asking the council to provide staff with direction on their recommendation. It's important to remember that this process really started off almost 2 years ago with several prominent citizens and council members knowledgeable about our fire risk and fiscal capabilities. And they began speaking about the need for more aggressive action against wildfire and the need for an additional sales tax to support those efforts. During those months, again, almost 2 years ago, but during those months, council was very active in this area. They allocated additional funds for the removal of additional fuels within the city. They directed the fire chief to stand up a new strategic plan, working with community members, which had very specific performance measures in it. And those measures can be reviewed constantly to see progress going on within the department on the city's website. You also hired 7 new limited term fire personnel to augment our fire programs with great success. Yet these efforts are really only the beginning of the work that's needing to be done. So to create more clarity back then within City Hall, we had staff develop an all-risk work plan based on a ½ cent, 3/4 cent, and full cent funding level. Brought that forward to the council for you to take a look at. Shortly thereafter, a citizens committee was formed, which developed a different kind of plan and a different approach to handling fire hazards. Staff met with the committee on several occasions, and we were unable to really come to an agreement on a single plan. So council reviewed both plans to better understand the desire. You looked at both plans and then asked to have some polling done to better understand how the committee or how the citizens of the community really viewed this particular issue. This is the 6th evening that we have met on this particular issue. Tonight, we will be providing you with staff's recommendation. We are recommending, sure I can see this here, a general tax for 1% with a 7-year sunset, and that it is maintained by an oversight committee. And we'll review each of these points throughout the night tonight, providing you with our rationale for their inclusion. It's also important for everyone to remember that what we are not doing tonight is asking the council to set a new tax. But what we're doing is asking for them to place it on the ballot for the citizens of Auburn to look at, digest, consider, and to ultimately vote on. As I mentioned, we had several new questions that came through. One of them is, my apologies here, I'm having a hard time just seeing this. I'm gonna have to back out for a moment. There we go. First question was why the city can't make cuts in other areas of the budget in order to get these projects done. It's a good question. One of the things many folks aren't aware of is that during the Great Recession, which started in 2007, the city did have to go through a process of downsizing because of budget constraints. Instead, though, of reducing levels of service, what we really tried to do was innovate, look at different ways of doing our jobs, even though we got smaller and smaller over subsequent years, to the point where staff did an excellent job of coming up with new ways of getting jobs done with fewer people. And because we were successful with that, the organization never really beefed back up as the economy recovered. That also allowed the city to take general funds that weren't being allocated to staff members and allocate that over to different projects such as infrastructure. But to give you just an example here, between 2007 and 2019, we actually have a drop in sworn staff in the police department by 23%, civilians down about 15%. Fire, we always took a little different tact with. And in fact, over those years of 2007 to 19, we increased staffing by 2 or 15%. And then last year, of course, the council added the 7 limited term firefighters, actually bringing the total up to an increase of 62%. Obviously, though, that's not going to be sustainable for us in the long run. Additional questions. Shouldn't we be upfront about CalPERS and how some of these funds could go to supplement shortfalls? Also, besides the Citizens Oversight Committee, how does this not become a blank check for the future city councils? You know, there's no doubt that our citizens need to always keep a close eye on how the city is spending their resources. But that's also why we've endorsed the Citizens Committee concept. Having a dedicated group of citizens to only focus on how those funds are being spent, how they're being utilized, working with the council to make sure that they are being utilized correctly. Also, a group like this could and really should show up at meddlers on maybe a quarterly basis, providing constant updates to our citizens. Also, it would be a good place for media and the press to reach out to as they continue to keep an eye on the process themselves. The 7-year sunset, we thought was a good idea to put in, really for the same reasons. If the city would ever want to extend a sales tax initiative like this past the 7 years, they would have to go back to our citizens. If in fact they did not utilize those funds correctly, if there was problems being identified through the city council or the oversight committee, there's not a chance that they would probably get any additional funds. So again, it's another good safeguard for a difficult situation. Would there be a problem postponing this process until the next general election? And when we receive the first influx of these funds, what are they going to be used for? Good questions with a lot of depth. So let me kind of jump in here for you. This is July, and should the city council wish to move forward to get this placed on the ballot, there would be a few more document exchanges that would need to occur between the council and the county to have that placed on the ballot. Then the only real primary role of the city from this day forward to election day would just be providing public information to the community and basic data on any questions they have about the operations of the city and how it applies to this initiative. Once election day comes on November 3rd, it's important to remember that the new tax doesn't even come into effect until April 1st. So it's non-existent until April 1st, 2021. And then the city won't even begin to receive funds until August, sometime in August of 2021. And it probably won't be receiving its full allocation of funds over time until December or even January of 2022. So it is easily an 18-month process between the time when you make a decision to move this forward on the ballot and when it starts to become a fully funded project. So there is some time that will be expended. I'm sorry. There is time that will be expended here as we keep looking forward. During that period of time, though, it is still going to be a very busy series of projects that need to move forward. First, the city needs to update its fiscal projections for the ballot measure itself. We come up with our original projections, and those were based on sales tax numbers 6 months ago. Today, if we redid those, they'd come in less. 6 months from now, they may be a little less. Again, they may be higher. We can't tell. But I think after the election, if it's a successful election, you need to recalculate those numbers so you have a better idea of where you're heading. Then the city council, the oversight committee, should work with staff to review public safety needs and priorities and come up with a set of priorities that meets the council and the community's goals. Once that's done, staff needs to develop a very specific work plan, preferably a multi-year work plan that meets the council's priorities, and then submit that to the oversight committee to ensure that in fact they are in agreement that it's meeting the correct priorities. It's doing so responsibly with those funds. Those funds are only being spent on those types of expenditures. And then jointly, the oversight committee and staff would go before the city council to present that information. Once that is approved, you would probably begin acquisition of resources for whatever projects that are on the work plan. Again, it's going to be a cash flow issue. What cash flow is available and when is it going to be available? Ultimately, though, once you have those questions answered, you can move forward with actual implementation of each of the projects within the work plan, and then go through essentially the same process annually and allow the city staff to come forward with all their performance measures of the work plan and their requests for the coming year for additional work. At this juncture, then I would like to hand the presentation over to the two chiefs, let them continue on, and then we'll hand it back to the city attorney to go over his portion of this presentation, and then we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. City Manager. Mr. Mayor and fellow council members, for the record, Dave Spencer, your fire chief. I brought up on my screen to share PowerPoint used to walk through the process of where we've been, how we got there, and where we are now. And with that, I'm going to ask the police chief, Ryan Canan, to start us off as we move forward. So I confirm that you can see the screen up in front of you.
I can see it. Thanks, Dave. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, Ryan Canan, your Chief of Police. And like Chief Spencer said, so this is our discussion of really how we got here, and to answer some of those questions of what would be the plan if we were to get the sales tax to be successful. Obviously, this is just a way and a recommendation for the way the funding could be spent. As you heard from the city manager, beginning February 2019, the fire chief really set off, along with a committee of stakeholders and community members, on developing a plan to address what we have found is one of the largest threats and one of the challenges to our community, which is wildfire. During that discussion, when as we got moving on it, as I got brought to the discussion as your chief of police, we really started talking about how do we address all the risk that our city faces. Obviously leading those efforts with wildfire. And at the end of the day is how do we get the best bang for our buck, with our community's funding. So we took this approach, including our public works director at the time, and developed this really three-pronged approach using fire, public works, and the police department. And then when we sat down, we identified as a large issue was we were identified as a community at risk in the city of Auburn, and being wildfire being our number one risk. But as we sat down at the table, we started discussing a lot of these issues. What we found in risks was additional things such as pre-fire, chronic code enforcement offenders, homelessness, and even a catastrophic fire response. Hold on there, Dave. So one of the things what we found is that we both have proven that we have a desire and a knowledge of why it's important to be proactive in our efforts. And again, as we kind of delved deep into both our departments, we started looking at some of the neglect that had taken place over the last decade, and some of that was the mitigation of fire risks, as well as even being able to address our chronic code offenders. We have a part-time code enforcement team now, and the city is unique in the way it's designed. We have properties that need to be maintained, and the biggest thing is we have those chronic people that go in year out, year in, and wait for us to do something about that. And it would be, we're at the point now we're being proactive to that. And we've demonstrated the importance of being proactive. Look at our homeless efforts, our CAT team, bringing in those different resources and addressing the homelessness. In addition to the homelessness, it's been identified about 95% of wildfires are started by people, and having city personnel to address that is very important. And with the homelessness, with those fires, we've actually had, since I've been the police chief, we've had several fires that have been started from the homelessness right here in the city itself. So it's important that we're able to deal with those issues. And as we identified, and the city manager talked about too, is some of our obstacles that we identified was related to not only the personnel, but also the demands that have taken place and really affected how we all do business in the public safety realm. When we're down 23% in sworn police officers, you can go back for me real quick, Dave. We start talking about resources and personnel. It does take people and our personnel to do many of the things that we're asking and taking this proactive approach to these issues. And now we have new things that we've dealt with since 2008. As we talked about before, the AB 109s, the Prop 47s, the Prop 57, homelessness, code issues. There's just a lot that the law enforcement side of it has. And we talked about the various advocacy programs.
How do I get myself back on the screen?
That we have to contend with, as well as the fire resources, not being fully developed over the last decade as well. City manager mentioned the use of grants to keep the firefighters on board. And one of those issues that we've identified with that is that you don't get fully developed firefighters as a result of constantly going through this couple-year trend with them and replacing them every couple of years. So public works is an extremely important part of these efforts as well, in partnership with them. And again, a lot of it takes personnel or the contract services. So our solution here is, really took in the three different departments, public works, fire, and police department, and started being able to be in a position where we could proactively deal with not only the contemporary issues we're dealing with now, but also the future issues that we know that we're going to be contending with as it relates to fire, but also those all risks that pop up. And I'll turn it over to the fire chief.
Thank you, Chief Canan. You might have heard I'm having a little technical difficulty on my side. However, I'll continue to move forward. As we developed our plan, for us as public safety experts, we use the 5 E's as an all-risk strategy to create community risk reduction programs. That includes the education effort, enforcement, engineering, economic incentives, and emergency response. It's a circular process, and no one element is any greater than the other. We move back and forth collectively based on the needs. And so that being said, some examples as we look at our education efforts. As you know, we've done a pretty extensive and robust effort at trying to communicate and educate our community, not only for risk, but current events and those types of things. And you can see that each one of the departments has an element within that. And so again, we're all 3 collectively working in synergy to try to use the 5 E's in that process. And as we go through it, it may be that on a particular item, law seems to be the heavy side, or on another item, public works may be front and center, and so forth. And so that's the example. When we talk about enforcement, as you know, Council Member Spokley expressed a concern about some of the challenges that we had with regard to our weed abatement program and the expeditious process and trying to move that forward. And by the time we got it resolved, we were late into the season, and really it wasn't an issue as the rains came. And so the police chief and I have been able to come together and use both of our codes and enforcement efforts to be able to move that item quickly so that we can come to a conclusion in a much more expeditious process. So those are examples of the types of things that we've been able to do on a go forward. Our engineering efforts, of course, revolve around our codes and ordinances within the city. It's important for us to remain current, relevant, and contemporary, and evaluate our codes on a regular basis to ensure that we're following best practices. And then when we talk about economic incentives, as you know, for every dollar that we invest in prevention efforts, it's well documented that we save $6 in recovery efforts as we go through that process. Examples in regard to economic incentives, I would use the police chief's efforts just in the homeless element and how successful he's been, and that is a direct decrease in dollar loss as a result. The emergency response obviously has been a great point of discussion here recently with the 7 firefighters and opening up the station in South Auburn off of Mighty Drive. And that again is an example of increased resources and the benefit of that. I'll use 2 specific examples that happened just in the last few months. The first would be an individual who suffered a heart attack. As a result, time is tissue. Our folks are trained to provide some medication to be able to reverse that process. They were able to implement that. And quite frankly, the gentleman survived what is known as a Widowmaker event. And so it was a significant impact, and you can't put a value on someone's life. I mean, there's a lot of times that we try to monetize that over a lifetime of economic contribution through work and that type of thing. But the reality is that that's essentially what we're there for in our core mission. The other example would be recent structure fire that occurred just around the corner from Station 3, where the firefighters were able to hold the fire to the attic space. And as a result, it was a significant save of property loss. And so those are the types of examples that we see as benefit for our emergency response. So when we talk about funding, as the chief indicated, we could certainly maintain the levels that we're doing with certainly prior to the implementation of the 7 firefighters, and just continue on the path that we were on. We both came in from an outside perspective, identified that there were some needs and certainly opportunities to be able to improve in our delivery models. So we both found ourselves talking with the city manager to say, we need to figure out some way to be able to increase some kind of funding process to be able to meet our goals, both for this council and the community. When we talk about the demands, keep in mind that every year we see greater and greater demands in public safety, and you can track that back over decades of different events that occur that continue to tax our resources. You've heard the police chief talk about mental health and how much of a part that is in his resource allocation. You see that with us now as we continue to work through this fuel reduction process to reduce the risk to the city. So those are examples. And then on an ongoing basis, we recognize that the city is essentially built out. There's not a lot of room for infill or development within the city proper. And so we know that there are some limits with that. And so we're doing everything we can to be good fiscal stewards for our budgets. And again, it gets us to a point where we begin to talk about other opportunities or other resources that we can contribute. And with that, I'll kick it back to the police chief. Oh, and I'm sorry, Ryan, you're muted.
Myself, so sorry about that. When we started looking at the funding sources, and I know it's been asked, is how did we rest on the sales tax idea? When we first went through this, we did look at, I know the idea is do we look at reducing funding from other city programs? Well, as we went through the budget, there really wasn't any place that we could reduce funding. And an example of that is we brought the 7 firefighters on, and we had to find additional resources and funding sources to that. Property taxes, we met with several community members, community leaders about this tax in general. And when the property tax concept came up, many people, and we've heard from many people that were concerned about the property tax idea because they felt that things were already added to their property taxes, school bonds are added to their property taxes, and they felt that that was really overtaxed. In addition, with the property tax being the city, the community themselves, the residents would be stuck with the full burden of this measure, which is where we got to the sales tax idea and being able to move forward on that. And the idea with that is that with the sales tax, we'd be able to really kind of share the burden between our residents, yes, but also those people, those families, and those who visit and shop and play in the city of Auburn. So really, that's how we rested on the sales tax. As we did our research into the sales tax, what that looks like, as you can see here on this slide, it talks about our Placer County allied agencies and where they fall in their current tax rate. Roseville being 7 3/4, Loomis 7.5, and then the other cities and county being 7 1/4. As you can see, our proposed would be the 8 1/4, which would make us right now would be the highest in Placer County. But I think it's important that we look at the region itself, because if we look at those 3 areas, Grass Valley, Nevada City, Nevada County, those are more like and more similar to the city of Auburn. And they have similar threats and similar issues that they have to contend with, just like we do. And you can see there, our 8 1/4 falls on, below 2 of those other locations in the sales tax rate. So I think that it was a good visual to let people know kind of where we are in that sales tax measure currently, and if we move forward. Another piece of the sales tax was actually understanding how it was broken down. I know a lot of people ask, what do we currently do with the money and how much money do we get in? And with this visual, it shows where most of our sales tax actually goes to. 6% or 6 cents for every dollar out of that 7 1/4 goes to the state. It goes back, a quarter of it goes to the county, and then we receive about 1% of that current sales tax rate. So again, just a visual of seeing where that money is. Our proposed 1% brings us to 8 1/4, which is an estimated revenue of about $2.5 million.
So when we talk about the 1% sales tax, obviously it's an increase. As the city manager articulated, when we did the modeling, we projected about $2.5 million in additional revenue. What that provides us is a fully enhanced public safety group, whether that's law or whether it's fire or public works. When we talk about our previous models, particularly with fire service, we were using grant funding to staff up additional folks to help cover our city with the appropriate resource level. One of the problems with that is that when you do that, it's a temporary hire. The training that you provide those folks now leaves with those individuals, and you lose that continuity and experience, and then you start the process all over again with the next grant or the next hiring. And so it certainly is problematic from a public safety perspective. When we talk about enhanced services, the other thing that's really critical is that up to this point, we've been in what I would describe as truly a non-proactive or a reflex stance in which we couldn't be proactive to be able to get out in front of issues and address demands. And so when you find yourself not being proactive and as comparison reactive, we're not able to make any real significant forward progress. We're simply just staying stagnant. And so when we stay stagnant, you don't see development of programs or development of initiatives from that level. So, and so when we sat down and looked at this all-risk plan, we were asked to put together really some of the costing issues associated with that. And so this is a representation of what that potentially could look like. So for that first year, obviously, we're talking about people. We need staff to be able to accomplish several things. And with that comes the infrastructure. Then in year two, you see similar costs as you move forward. And then as we wind down into year 3 through 5, you see that continue to decrease. And that's associated with the original plan that we had put together. But again, as we're talking about this, it is the idea that we would come before that advisory committee, identify what our priority projects are and our priorities for each individual section, all tying together to reduce the risk within the community and move forward from there. By comparison, when we talk about a special tax versus a general tax, special tax is, as you know, designed for a very specific purpose and for a specific time frame. It does have a higher threshold for approval as opposed to the general tax. The general tax, of course, certainly that money can be used for anything that this council feels appropriate. It has a lower threshold, 50% plus one. And as, again, the public safety chiefs, we continue to come to you and say, you know, our concern is that we are going to find ourselves at some point having to address issues that we didn't see coming. And that flexibility continues to be a concern of ours. We've seen that over the course of our careers. And so that is really the nexus of our recommendation with regard to the use of a general tax. And then with that, I'll kick it back to the police chief.
So again, I mean, as we went through this process, accountability, transparency, you know, the oversight, all those things played a role in, obviously, in the minds of a lot of people, including both Chief Spencer and myself. When it starts talking about people trusting us with the funding and what we were doing with that. And again, people have asked, well, what is this public safety? If this was the route we would go, and if this is successful in the sales tax initiative, after that, would be the goal would be to establish this advisory committee to help us, working with Chief Spencer and myself and the new public works director, on identifying and prioritizing those contemporary needs of the city of Auburn as it relates to public safety. And you know, the goal of this advisory committee, and obviously, would be to ensure that we are hearing those recommendations and following those recommendations and accomplishing what we set out. In addition, receiving and providing recommendation to city council. You know, again, if we're, as the chiefs, we're coming to the council and this advisory group explaining, these are the concepts, these are ideas of how do we make this community safer? How do we address the all risks to our community, as well as staying in, contemporary times. Chief Spencer and I talked about, this could, as an advisory council or advisory group, could be, have a fire subcommittee as well as a police subcommittee, and having, the community engaged in what both of our departments are doing. And what's nice, and what I've said since I've been here, is the city and the community and the residents are very proactive in wanting to know what's going on, very engaged, has a desire to be engaged, but they're also willing to listen and to hear out from both sides, which has been very positive, and what I've been very appreciative as that relates to being the police chief. Continue with the transparency and accountability. The concept of developing a designated account for both the revenue side of it, but as well as the expense account. Understanding that the funding, as the fire chief has said, the funding for increase in personnel and equipment. We talked about the advisory council, where the subcommittees could play a role if that's the direction we were to go, as well as providing annual financial audits to the council, making them public. And to understand that, with this sales tax initiative, if it goes through, there is no increase to pay and benefits for the city staff as this initiative, the sales tax, plays a role in that. And again, we talked about this before, is what are these, the talking points, and as we move forward through this, if it is added to the November ballot, is how do we talk about this? And these are examples to this initiative. Obviously, the city of Auburn is identified as a community at risk from wildfires, which again, most of our community is well aware of. And the city of Auburn, we face some of these other long-term challenges. We've seen the homelessness increase. We've seen the laws change from the legislature. The reality is we're seeing prisoners let out at a pretty rapid basis, given the issues we're talking about now. And that's a contemporary issue that we didn't even have really a year ago. Our chronic code offenders, as the fire chief mentions, we can work together, and we have worked together on using our current codes to be more proactive in getting to deal with some of these issues that our community has really asked to be addressed. City resources have been diminished since the Great Recession and not covered. The sales tax being a shared cost between residents and visitors, as well as that transparency with the Citizens Advisory Oversight Committee, the mandatory annual audits, and the 7-year sunset provision. So these are just some examples, I think, as it relates to the talking points for the initiative. And I think with that, we take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Chiefs, and Bob as well. I'm going to do questions in the order that I can see everybody. So I'm going to start with Council Member Stokely. Councilmember Spokely, do you have any questions? If so, you are on mute.
No.
Okay. I will move on and we'll circle back. Councilwoman Mackey, any questions?
I have a lot of comments. I'm not sure how many questions I have, but I do have some concerns. Some of my questions have been answered with the PowerPoint. Would have liked to seen it all in the staff report when we got it on Friday, but it's really helpful seeing this PowerPoint. It was very well done, so that I could have had some of my questions answered when I was reading the agenda. So the fire chief and the police chief, both of you have given us a great presentation. I want to know, is there anybody here from Public Works or planning at the meeting tonight? Because I wanted to ask some questions of perhaps them, what some of their specific requests would be other than what we saw in the PowerPoint. So I guess I won't be able to do that. I'll save my comments, of course, till later, but all my questions have pretty much been answered. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Mackey. Councilmember Dodd-Tavio.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions. Again, I do appreciate, as Council Member Mackey indicated, the detail that was provided in the PowerPoint, specifically with regard to the Oversight Committee, because that was really an area that I did not have very much information. So it appears that that would now serve not only as a reviewer of the expenditures, but also be proactive in helping to establish the priorities for the coming year. On that, I wonder, I suppose that the devil would be in the details there. At a later date, if this were put on the ballot, we would have to work out the details as to how many would serve and who would serve and how they're selected and so forth. Because I think that is also very important. But at the end of the day, I think it's important that everybody understands that regardless of who makes the recommendations, the decisions will rest with the city council, where they rest now. And that's really, again, the buck stops with the city council, and it may or may not move forward with recommendations that are made to it either by the committee or by staff. Certainly, I know that if I was here, I would take those recommendations into account. But in any event, it's not really a question. I guess a question just would be that we would need to really flesh out the details on that. A question, and this is a couple questions for Gary. Can you please discuss the process in which the measure would sunset in 7 years? I know there's been some discussion of folks saying, I've never seen a tax sunset or go away. I know that it's written in the ordinance itself that it would go away in 7 years. But can you please just expand upon that, and that, you know, whether or not a brand new measure would need to be brought to the voters, either through voters doing it, citizens committee, or the council? Can you just discuss that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so that's exactly what would have to happen. Because this is a tax, only the voters would be able to continue it past the 7 years. It's written in there. The council can't take that out. The council can't extend it. The council can't shorten it. So if it's approved and it goes in there, that's it. It will be 7 years unless it's extended again by the voters past that. In order to extend it, there would need to be another ballot measure placed before voters, either by the council or by a citizen petition to place a ballot measure to extend that. That's the only way it can happen. Otherwise, the tax will go away, and in 7 years, it will reduce back down to 7.25 from 8.25.
Thank you. I think that's a very important part, and it's important that the public understand that, because it may not necessarily be clear. So thank you very much. Also, Gary, would this apply to online purchases for those businesses that are located within the city that may have an online presence?
So it depends on where they're shipping it. The transactions and use tax and the Wayfair decision will apply the tax rate of the jurisdiction that you're shipping things into. And so if you have an online business and you're shipping things outside of the city, you're going to pay the tax rate and pay the tax to wherever it's landing eventually. There's a use tax that's paid if a citizen here purchases something somewhere else and uses it here. So that's why when you purchase a car, sometimes they ask you, where are you actually living, so that we know what tax you have to pay. So if you have an online business and you're shipping it out of the city, this tax increase you will not pay. The existing sales tax is actually enacted under a different Bradley Burns local sales tax, which has slightly different rules. That's beyond the scope of this. But for purposes of this 1%, if you're shipping it out of the city boundaries, then no.
So then if you're a business located outside of the city of Auburn, but you're shipping into the city, would there be that increase or no?
Yes.
Collected?
Yeah, because
It would.
coming here. Yeah.
Okay, so if there,
large retailers, yeah.
so if, for example, we had an Auburn resident that purchased something from Amazon, then the sales tax, that increase would be collected from that purchase and given to the city of Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And then, so then I just want to confirm with staff, we figured that into our projected revenues then, that the online sales that are coming into Auburn would also, is that correct, chiefs, city manager?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's pretty much the only questions that I had at this time, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Amara.
Thank you. I had to unmute. So, you know, I really found the presentation to be informative, very well done. I appreciate that so much. I especially liked seeing the difference between the regional tax versus the county. That was very interesting and important, I think, to point out. Thank you for that, Chief Canam. So, you know, I guess my you know, my questions will be more comments, so I don't really have any questions. By way of, I mean, I think you might have answered this. Have you, what is the reason for a 1 cent versus a half? Is it just in terms of if we're going out, it's, we might as well go for the 1 cent, or is the half something that you have considered as well? I don't know who wants to answer that.
You know, I think we looked at the 3 different funding scenarios: half, 3/4, and full cent. And as we discussed those and brought them forward some time ago to overview with the council, it was very obvious that even at the 1 cent funding level, we were going to have a hard time meeting a lot of the critical needs that we have just today in the city. So to go through all this effort and all this work, we felt at the city staff level, we need to have as great an impact with new services as possible. And it's interesting, it's what we ultimately learned from the citizens in the community as well through the polling process. They also endorsed, if you're going to do this, do it right, do it once, do it right.
Okay. And was it Grass Valley or Nevada City? They did a 1%. Is that correct, Rob? When they
Grass Valley a decade ago did a half cent that sunset in 10 years. And so a couple things happened there. One, they did want to keep going with it, and then they wanted an additional half cent. And it was interesting because, again, it was a general tax, but the community made the decision that it would go for police, fire, and roads. That was the community's values there. The oversight and the advisory committee process worked wonderfully. A lot of communication. We had a 10-year laid out plan at all times, and we actually had just a running document always on the city's website so people could see how expenditures were going, where they did. And really, it helped keep staff on task because they knew they wanted, they didn't want that to sunset. And so they did an excellent work all the time, trying to prove to the community that they deserve that money and that it should continue to move forward. So I think there's a lot of value to that sunset, not just ensuring that to the community that it will go away if it's not being used well, but more importantly, it lets all of us know, hey, we need to do a good job with that money if we want it to continue on as well.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Let me come back to Council Member Spokely. He did send me a message saying he was trying to get himself off mute. I've asked the city clerk if she can see if, since he is on the phone, if she has the ability to manually unmute him. But Council Member Spokely, do you want to try again to see if you have any questions? We can hear you. Amy, are you able to?
Yeah, I've requested twice. It's not unmuting.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, for just a moment.
Yeah, go ahead while we try to see if we can get him to his phone to connect. Go ahead.
With the previous comment, it would be, I think, good to share that with the rest of the council that the mayor and I are already working on the basis of a comprehensive advisory committee resolution and process. We're going to try to flesh that out to the extent possible. So early on in this process, we can send it to the council, get it to the community, start to get good, solid feedback on the pros, the cons, how we can make it even stronger. And so the community can see that even before November and have the opportunity to make comment as well.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. I was going to mention that in comments because as I said at the last meeting, I think that's very important. So I did put together, not fully baked, so that's why staff hasn't brought it forward, but I'll wait the comments to talk a little bit more about some of my thoughts on oversight.
While we're waiting for Matt, I have a couple of questions that brought up to me.
Go ahead.
Did we get any input from the Chamber of Commerce regarding this measure, or some of the previous members of the committee that were looking at the special tax measure? Have we gotten any of them on board with this at all? Bob?
I know I have not reached out to the chamber. I know that they had heard presentations from the Citizens Committee, but in fact, as far as I know, the Citizens Committee still has the philosophical bent of going a different direction. And I think there's things that might have been misconstrued a little bit, that we didn't like that program because it was a special tax. Well, that's not the case. We're not 100% behind a special tax because obviously it's much higher bar to raise. And in the case of that particular presentation or their program they wanted to move forward, it was entirely focused on essentially fuel reduction, and much of it outside of the city. We were looking from the perspective of having a far broader impact where we could utilize the resources of multiple city departments to deal with multiple issues should this council desire in the future. So they were just a much more focused effort. It wasn't so much that special tax, but they were a focused effort, much more. And we like the general approach to give, again, that flexibility for the future.
What about the chamber, though?
I can
Don't
speak
you
on
think
that
we-
if you'd like me to.
Yeah.
The
Yes, I would.
subcommittee of the Government Affairs and Economic Development for the Auburn Chamber of Commerce heard this issue last week at their meeting on Wednesday morning.
Mhm.
And they visited it and they discussed making a decision and supporting one or the other, and then ultimately decided to wait to see what the action of the city council is, and then which type of a tax it's going to be, and hear the information again, and then choose whether to support the tax.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I appreciate that as well. Councilmember, take your mute. That's it. I do have a question or two, but Councilmember Mar, looks like you have a follow-up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just following up with Cheryl. I was at the Downtown Business Association, and I brought it forward there to ask them, and their take was not to support it because they're very impacted right now with COVID. But if we did pass it now, of course, the council hasn't taken action. But if we did decide to take action, I think if they had input, they would maybe come around. So that was my take. But yeah, I have to report that they did not support it.
Okay, thank you for that information as well. Gary, this is for you. I just want to follow up because there has been a lot of discussion, and we have had the opportunity to review some of the public comment that will be presented in just a little bit. But the plan that we reviewed, I think it was in January, that was the citizens group that had been put together that had the special tax. If I'm not mistaken, one of the biggest concerns about that was just in how that specific plan, at least as drafted, was written, included us spending money outside the city boundaries. I just wanted to verify with you that was a concern, that we would not be able to do that as was written. Is that correct?
So there were a couple concerns that were raised with the draft that was presented to the council. One was the spending of funds outside of the city limits. The issue that I'd seen in reviewing this, and I believe this was communicated to the group, was that there's no guarantee in the future that it would be allowed, right? So ultimately the city is spending money because another agency is allowing that to happen. And we don't have any reason to believe that would stop right now, but that is an issue if you look out into the future, if something were to change, if some policy were to change.
Okay, I mean, that doesn't change for our discussion when we get into comments, whether or not we want to do a special or a general tax measure. I just wanted to clarify that what came to us, the original proposal, it's hard to remember everything because I think we've been talking about it longer than what was on Bob, your slide that went back to January of this year. Thank you for that. Chief Spencer, I think it was you who had presented kind of the breakdown of the tax percentages for the jurisdictions around us. And in really looking closely, obviously, the tax generator closest to us that we really compete the most with is Placer County, which right now is the same percentage. Now, if we were to take any action to put something forward and the voters approved it, we would go higher than what the county is. How does the county pay for fire services? Because I was under the impression, mainly because in my previous home, when I lived in the northern part of our city limits, but still in the county fire protection district, interestingly enough, it was on my property taxes. Does the county fund its fire through property taxes?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you. So primarily, funds come from two sources, depending on how the county or district is set up. So as you know, in Placer County, we have fire districts, and then we have our CAL FIRE partners that certainly we collaborate with. The funding generally is derived from property taxes, but there are several districts that have done a parcel tax in addition to the property tax. So a lot of times when you talk about a district, you can set it up either what we know as a structural fire fund, meaning that the monies that come to the agency providing fire protection comes from the property taxes, or you do a contract, cash contract essentially with an agency in which you would pay for those services. And then say the city of Auburn was contracting with an outside agency, we would pay that cash contract as an example. So those are the couple of different ways. And to answer your question more specifically, Placer County does receive their funds through property taxes.
But on the converse of that, the city of Roseville, as I think we talked about at the last meeting, Measure B that's a sales tax that then funds their fire. So they are more sales tax driven than going the property tax route.
Correct. And I think this goes back to the conversation that Chief Canan had where when we talked with the community, it was, and granted, it was not we just grabbed different community leaders and tried to get a sense of what our community thought. They were very specific about, please do not add any taxes to our property taxes or parcel tax. We have enough of that. And so really, as we vetted that conversation, it really came down to the idea of a sales tax, because it's not the entire burden on this community. It certainly is shared with those that visit within this area.
Okay. And one last question, Bob, this one's for you, and to put you on the spot of the conversation we were just having. So the Citizens Oversight Committee, which again, I think probably several of us will have some comments to make here afterwards. What's your thought process though, as far as, when do we want to, get that started? And the reason I ask, obviously, as I've already told you, but just for the benefit of everybody else, is I think that there's an ability for a group now to get started in evaluating our services program level needs, so that should this move forward and should the voters agree that we need to increase services, they already have some set of recommendations that can go forward. Again, putting you on the spot, I realize, but any thoughts on the timing of when we would actually institute bringing this official committee together?
There's going to be a lot of moving parts going forward. You're going to have, it looks like, a citizens committee moving forward. You're going to have a number of employee groups working to move forward. And this particular oversight committee would really be an analytical group. And one of the things we always have to watch for during campaigns like this, especially that are city sponsored, is that we don't move from just simple data collection, data analysis, and data distribution into advocacy. And this particular group, I think it's going to be very important to make sure that everyone sees them as those who are overseeing and not advocating for something. So we may want to hold off for a while before they really jump into developing that group until the campaign is well developed or over. So there's not the confusion that these folks are there to represent the community not advocate for a particular item on the ballot.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Gary, if I don't mind, just following up on that answer with you, with that being said, I would assume, but again, I just want to confirm that if we appoint a committee, they would fall under the same election restrictions that the city would, as far as not being able to dive into advocation versus education. And so I hear what Bob's saying and can see that could be some gray area. Any thoughts on how we could still have that group going before November, or would it be your legal recommendation that it is not gray, that they would need to wait until after?
So it's the use of public funds that's prohibited. So if there is a committee that's a city committee, it would be using some public funds in some capacity because it would be an official committee. And it's the use of public funds to persuade or advocate, as the city manager mentioned. So it would be my recommendation to wait, I think, to form the official citizens committee that the ordinance envisions. It will be 5 members under the way that the ordinance is currently drafted. It has to meet at least once a year, but it can meet much more frequently than that if you choose. And it has to review the prior year's expenditures and then make recommendations for future years. And recommendations, like any other budget proposal, are essentially advocacy. These things should happen, these things should not. And so you get into, I think I agree with the city manager, it'd be very difficult to distinguish between here's a need and here is something that you should do because of that. And so I think there's some risk there.
Okay, I appreciate that. Obviously, I don't like it, but I appreciate both of your comments. Councilwoman Donald and Calvillo, and then we'll come to Councilwoman Mackey.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with that. Really the purpose of this oversight committee is a, if the measure goes on the ballot, then its activities start afterwards, after it has passed, or and so I think really we do need to wait, or we would need to wait on that. So I would fully support what Gary's saying if this does go to the voters.
No, I appreciate that. I'll explain my thought process, though, maybe moot at this point in comments. Councilwoman Mackey, go ahead.
Well, I would appreciate if the oversight committee was appointed after the election personally, because somebody who used to be on city council might want to sit on that oversight committee.
Like I said, it's probably a moot point, but at least I guess we can do whatever we want in this meeting right now. So I'll just say the reason that I really wanted to get it going right away was, in my opinion, and maybe it's not the will of the rest of the council. And again, it sounds like technically and legally it's really not possible, but I really would like to be able to have a group that's outside of us and outside of our staff, be able to have a voice to say, here as a community, as an actual representative of the community, here's our priorities. And let them kind of validate with our police department, with our fire department, with our public works, that, yeah, we want to see more in roadways. We want to see more officers to do X, Y, Z, more code enforcement, whatever that looks like. So that, assuming, again, making assumptions here, but assuming that the voters say we do want this, then we as a council have a real good recommendation, not just from city staff, but really from some representatives of our community, who then will also be tasked to make sure that they know exactly what it is they looked at, they did the research, they helped have say in the projects, and now their ability to kind of oversee it and report back to us is just easier. But again, I think the points you guys have both made are well taken, and in the legal pieces as well. But that was my thought process, was just letting them kind of come to us and help us. Again, I think the 5 of us are pretty darn educated, and we seems like spend 3 to 4 meetings a week these days. So, I know we know what's going on, and our staff are well informed, but I just thought it was another important tool to get, citizen engagement in it. So anyways, with that said, any other questions before we go to public comment? Councilwoman Mackey, did you have a follow-up?
Did you ever get a hold of Matt?
Have
you ever gotten a hold of Matt?
No, I have not. He had messaged me and said that he was not able to get himself unmuted. It looks like, just confirm with Amy, she wasn't able to manually. I did message him and asked if he has any questions, both via text and via chat here through Zoom and have not heard back. So Matt, if you are listening, you can email, you can chat, you can text, and we will bring up your comments or your questions.
How is he going to be able to vote?
Well, that's what I was gonna say.
Daniel?
Hopefully we can reconnect with him very shortly here.
Because I have a question of the attorney,
Yeah, go ahead.
Gary.
Yep.
This has to pass by 4/5, correct?
Yes, to place it on the ballot, the council needs a 4/5 vote, correct?
Okay.
If I don't, Amy, if you don't mind, would you mind seeing if you could get a hold of him and see if we can get him unmuted or get him connected to the meeting? I know he had some
Mr. Mayor,
items, so he wasn't able to Zoom in. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to suggest that he can just call the city clerk and she can put him on speakerphone. That would work, or he could call you so that he has an opportunity to speak through that way. If he can't get in through Zoom, I would just suggest that he go ahead and do that so that he can participate.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're
So,
out there listening, Matt, if you can hear us, call Daniel or Amy.
Amy, do you mind just checking in with him?
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. With that, are there any additional questions? Because I know we do have some public comment on this item. Okay, not seeing any more questions. Chiefs, thank you. Stick around here. Amy, I'm sorry. I know we just asked you to make that phone call. When you are ready, if you don't mind starting us off with public comment. I'm sorry.
No problem.
And actually, Matt can hear us and he has been listening. I'll just say here as Amy gets these going, as we always do with our COVID-19 Zoom meetings, we have had a chance. The council was presented these public comments, even the ones that occurred here in late this afternoon. So we have had a chance to read them, even though some may not be able to be readable during the time period that, of course, they are and will be available as part of the public record, and you can watch the video as you want. So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there. So Amy, if you don't mind starting public comment, that would be appreciated. Okay, great. Thank you very much to all of those. Before we move on to comments, I just really want to quickly check in with our city clerk to see if she has had any luck yet of adding Matt back to the meeting. I see he has added. Councilmember Spokley, let's try this again and see if you can unmute yourself.
Hello.
There we go.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you. Councilmember Spokley, go ahead and if you want to, we'll start let you opportunity to ask any questions you might have.
First of all, I want to apologize to the council and the community. I was trying to do this remotely so I could sneak into my daughter's birthday party that's about to be going on, so I apologize. The questions I had were asked by my fellow council members. I do certainly have comments for everybody once we get to that point.
And we are at that point, so why don't you lead us off?
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think that the council has demonstrated over the years their fiscal conservativeness in how we have responded to various financial crises that have come to the city. Obviously, the Great Recession was one where it was before my time on the council, but watching the council react the way they did made me feel good about my representatives who were representing me at the time. We've got a history of fiscal conservativeness in our community, and that makes me feel good with a general sales tax initiative moving forward that the representatives that we all elect will hopefully serve us appropriately and continue that fiscal conservativeness that we know our constituents want and demand of us. The needs that we face as a community with respect to public safety are growing day in, day out dramatically. And the citizens group that formed to push a specific sales tax was great, in my opinion. I appreciated all the work that they did. I will say I'm disappointed that they've decided that given the change in direction, slight change in direction with respect to the sales tax is a bit disappointing. I think that it doesn't change the fact that we still have an extreme fire risk. It doesn't change the fact that the legislature is changing laws and pushing criminals out onto our streets at an unbelievable rate. It doesn't change the fact that our homeless situation and our public works staff aren't needed out there to help with that particular situation. I think if you wrap them all together and look at what this initiative is trying to do, it's trying to help the city take care of all of these things that to a large extent are out of our control. If our neighbors in the canyon would maintain their property, we wouldn't be as concerned. We wouldn't have as big a problem as we currently face. They don't. We have to do something on our own to deal with this. And it's not just a single faceted fire situation. It's a multifaceted, as our chiefs laid out for us all, it's a multi-tiered thing. And I, for one, when I'm done serving my time on city council, will have faith in the fact that I can elect my representatives to continue the fiscal conservative approach, the fiscal conservative way that we've demonstrated we have been in the past. So for me, I'm in support of moving forward with a general sales tax initiative as laid out. A very important part of this for me will be the citizens review board that we're going to put together that will help, that will help guide the city council on how these monies are spent. And I think that's without that, I'm not in support of this thing moving forward. But I do believe that we've got a history in our community of a very fiscally sound, fiscally conservative city council, and I have no reason to believe that's going to change in the future. With this citizens review group, I think that will help keep everybody focused on what's critically important for our community, which is public safety. So thank you, Daniel, for the opportunity to comment. I apologize again for all of the technical difficulties I was having, but I'm certainly in support of moving forward with the general sales tax.
Great, thank you. And we got you reconnected. Next, Councilwoman Mackey.
I was just relaxing here, sorry. So the onus of the proposed tax measure has rested almost entirely on the shoulders of our two very capable public safety officials, our police chief and our fire chief, and they are to be commended because the presentation was excellent, states all the important facts of our many needs in our community. And I appreciate all the work that they have done for this. I believe it's been an unfair burden to them entirely because there are other portions of the city that could use these funds. And there's no guarantees that the funds will always be used for public safety. I want to get that right out there because the funds derived from a general tax can and will be used for whatever this council, future councils deem necessary. Planning, paving the roads, economic development, whatever project the city council and future councils deem necessary. So, of course, I've been a little bit hesitant to support this tax. That said, I spoke with Lynn, I think you say Tennell is the way you say her last name. And she and Jimmy Mullinex are the ones that sent us the email about supporting this. And she has assured me that she is going to get a citizens committee together to promote this tax measure if we agree on it tonight. She's a passionate advocate for our public safety leaders in our community of Brian and Dave both. And they will start recruiting a group immediately, she told me, to help promote and support this tax measure. So I had a nice conversation with her, and I think she is going to be a strong advocate and a very good leader of this effort. I would like to see the chamber on board. I'd like to see our former committee that was in favor of the special tax on board. And I think we all have to make sure we're in this together. While it's not an ideal measure for me and has been brought to us in starts and bits, I'm going to support it for no other reason, but because of the faith and trust I have in our public safety officials and staff. They need our support now more than ever, and I'm not going to let them down by voting no. I trust that they will do the right thing. I believe in them. All of our firefighters, our fire chief Dave, our chief of police Ryan, and all the police officers, they need us now more than ever, like I said. So I'm going to vote for this tonight, and I'm going to vote yes. Just want to let you know that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Mackey. Appreciate that. Councilwoman Dowden Calvillo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I do have quite a few comments, so just letting you know up front. First of all, I just wanted to start off by saying that the process that has been utilized to get us to where we are today hasn't been ideal. I think that we can all agree that there has been some bumps in the road. We had a couple different paths that were taken. The process was not ideal. I think if you were to sit down and try to come up with a process to move forward with a measure like this, it would look a little bit differently. I think Roseville used a very smart process, and it got them to where they needed to be. So I use that as a model. And I think that we have gone a different route, and it wasn't ideal. I am concerned that the timing is not ideal as well. We're in the middle of COVID-19 recovery. We know that's going to take years for us to get out of this. Our residents and our businesses do have fiscal constraints right now. Some folks have said it doesn't make a lot of sense to ask people to pay more when they're suffering already some financial concerns with COVID-19. We also have a new city manager that's starting in August, and he's going to be thrown right into the middle of this, as opposed to being able to have the advantage of starting from point one and moving the process forward. And we do have a lot of issues internally to deal with as well. With that said, Auburn is a community at risk. It's been identified as so by the National Fire Plan. We do have a 62% probability of a hostile fire ignition in our very high and our high severity zones. I also recognize that the National Institute of Building Science says that for every dollar invested in disaster mitigation saves society $6. I think that our fire department has done a great job trying to address these issues with the development of two plans that were brought to the council in the past. One was the Wildland Urban Interface Strategic Plan from 2019, and the other was the Auburn Fire Risk and Fuel Reduction Work Plan for 2019 to 2024. The latter report incorporates not just strategies and goals from the fire department, but the police department and public works as well. Because truly fire prevention is not just about the fire department. I know that in that plan, the police department proposes a full-time problem-oriented policy program to address pre-fire risks, and also a code enforcement team to better address ongoing code violations. And right now, as the chief indicated, we have a part-time code enforcement staff enforcer. So I know he's looking to have a whole team to address complaints of lots that haven't been weed eated and so forth, and other areas that may be of concern as possible ignition sources. It also brings in public works. I really value the idea of a chipper program internally. I like that a lot. I know that in my own neighborhood, which we are a fire-wise community, we've done a lot with regards to tree trimming, and we've had the chipper out here many, many, many times. Now they're backlogged and they're not even working. And so we've got all this fuel sitting around, and it would be wonderful to have the city to have its own program so that it can get to its residents quickly and reduce those fuel loads. I also like the fact that Public Works could be trimming the limbs in the urban areas. I know they do that now, but there would be more opportunity to do some of that. And then also with the green waste enhancement. I've always been someone that's promoted that, and would look forward to having an opportunity to explore that more. The city is underfunded for public safety. We just had the opportunity to sit through 5 hours of discussions on our budget. I'm glad that we had that opportunity before today's meeting, because it really highlighted what's happening with our budget today. We do have our 7 firefighters that are funded, but now they're only funded through the end of the year. And if we don't have some kind of sustainable funding sources, we're not going to be able to keep them, I'm afraid. I asked our city clerk to do a little research as far as elections were concerned for sales tax increases. And I think she said she only had records back to 1980. And since then, we've never gone to the city council's never put a measure before the voters requesting a sales tax increase. So this is a first time. I agree with Council Member Spokley that this city has functioned very conservatively from a fiscal perspective. And we've been very frugal, and we've done a lot with a little, but there becomes a breaking point at some time. I know that the total estimated cost to implement both these plans is about $3.9 million. So the 2.56 is not, it's a good drop in the bucket. I also remember hearing somewhere along the line that the cost breakdown per resident was about $100. When I heard that, I thought to myself, I'll write a check myself and for 3 of my neighbors. And just because I believe in our city and I believe that this is so incredibly critical to be able to fund our public safety. I also note that there is a citizens group now that stepped up. Council member Mackey had mentioned that she spoke with one of them and with Lynn, but Lynn and Jimmy. And that gives me some peace of mind. As I indicated during our last discussion, that was a big concern of mine, that there wasn't that group that was going to push this forward, because to me, that's incredibly important for anything to be successful. I also note that this measure does have a sunset date, and I'm glad that our legal counsel was able to clarify that the only way that the tax collection could be continued would be if a new measure was put on the ballot before the voters. That's incredibly important to me too. 7 years, it's done. If we can't demonstrate that we're being fiscally responsible with the taxpayers' dollars, then those taxes go away. Also, the Oversight Committee, I know we have to flesh that out more. And there's been some good discussion and presentation of information tonight. I really had, at first I had a lot of questions about it. There is some more work there, who serves on it, terms and things of that nature. But there is that entity that is there to assist in the review process. I also note that in addition to the Oversight Committee, the ordinance would require that a accountant audit the funds as well. The proceeds and the expenditure shall be audited annually by an independent accounting firm, and that report would not only be discussed at a council meeting, but also made available on our website. Again, as you know, council, the transparency and accountability is incredibly critical and important to me. I know it is to you too, but I just keep touting it. It's that important to me. I had my notes and now I messed up my. So, although I have frustrations with the process that was used to get us to where we are today, and the timing is not ideal, given all that we as a community are facing today, the bottom line is that catastrophic events like fire, they don't wait until you have the perfect process or plan, or they don't wait until the timing is just right. And at the end of the day, I view the protection of the public health and safety of our residents, our businesses, and our visitors as our most important task as council members. And if this measure passes, if it's put on the ballot and passes, I believe that it would allow us to enhance that protection with enhancements with fire department, the police department, and public works. Therefore, I will support placing this measure on the ballot and granting the registered voters the chance to decide if enhancing essential services like fire and police are just as important to them as they are to me. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Dowden Calvillo. Councilwoman Amara.
Thank you, Mayor Blount. So, you know, we have been discussing this for quite a while. It was brought up many times before, and now we're getting down to decision time. And we have considered a lot of things, and we've received the surveys. And so, you know, after all this careful consideration, I feel it's necessary to put this sales tax measure on the ballot for consideration by our citizens. And I'm not an advocate of implementing tax unnecessarily. So in this situation, however, I believe it's necessary for the viability of our city. I'm going to approach this a little different. You know, based on the fact that we do have a real threat of catastrophic fire, shortages in our police department, and a lack of strong economic base from which we can derive income, we need to have this measure. We need additional revenue. We don't even have resources, as we saw on our last budget meeting, to fund various committees that we can use to promote Auburn. We don't have an economic developer director to focus in on the many entrepreneurs who are relocating out of the Bay Area and other metropolitan areas to places like Auburn. These are opportunities lost. And as a result of the COVID, and a myriad of other financial problems that face smaller cities like Auburn, we have a financial situation, and we can't fund the police and fire and all of the projects that are necessary to keep our city going in the direction that we need it and want it to go. So that's why I would also support on the oversight committee having a variety of individuals, including a business owner, so that we can hear input in terms of the funding in that regard. That is why also I believe a sales tax is necessary, and doing nothing is not an alternative, especially in this current time. We all know that this will help move Auburn forward in the long run, and it's an opportunity lost. So my position is that I fully support putting this on the measure on the ballot for the citizens to determine whether or not they want to support our town. And that's my position. Thank you, Mayor Berlant.
Great. Thank you, Councilwoman O'Mara. I will be brief, and I will just start out with the fact that in the climate that we're in, nobody likes to talk about taxes. And, I look at the gas tax that was recently passed and kind of the backdoor deals that started it, and then the discussion of taking some of that money, withholding some of that money. And I can see how people get very angry when it comes to taxes and the mistrust that there is with taxes. And I agree. I mean, I think it's very solid. The difference in the city that I try to explain to people is that, while we may distrust our federal leaders and our state leaders, the five of us, we really are volunteers that are just members of the community. We are residents, and it's our job to really be the oversight of our city staff to make sure that they're accountable. And so, I would hope that people understand that they have a voice, and that's us. And I think the four of us and even the council members before us have all been very approachable and communicable, so that if you have an issue and you have a concern, you can raise it. And I think that's an important part of local government, is being able to trust your leaders. And there's a lot of lack of trust going around these days. Now, I will tell for the council, I have had a conversation with our future city manager, because as was noted, he's going to be the one who is going to have to maneuver through this process, and also the one to implement it should it pass. Now, he told me that in Winters, the city he came from, they've brought measures 3 times to the voters, and all 3 of them passed in the 70s. So he said that in the reality of it being that successful was trust in the city. So I think we have work to continue to do to make sure that people understand what it is that this money will go for, what it is that the need is, and how are we going to ensure that it's spent correctly. As I mentioned at the top, and we talked a little bit about the citizens oversight, I think that that's an important key to have citizens engaged and to add an extra level of a watchdog, even though we are the watchdog at the end of the day. The 5 of us are elected to do that. But I think that having some outside individuals who can report back to us that the money is spent the way we designate it. And that's the key here, is even if we move forward with a general tax, there's all this, thoughts of, well, the council could use it for whatever. Listen, if we don't like how the council allows the city to use it, we can recall them. We have opportunities to ensure that money is used the way we as a community want it to be used. But the example that I give is that 10 years ago, we weren't dealing with Prop 47 where we let out all of the inmates. 10 years ago, we didn't have the same level of homelessness on our communities, on our streets, causing problems and needing services that they needed to get connected with. But we've taken action to redirect resources to those new growing issues. Well, I wasn't on this council 10 years ago, but I don't think fire was at the same spotlight that it's at now. We've always been at the top of a ridge top. That hasn't changed, but our overall fire risk across California is different today than it was a decade ago. So what I'm getting at is we need to have some flexibility to be able to change to the future of not knowing what disasters will be occurring in 5 years. I hope it's not a COVID-25. I hope it's not, murders or, any other, and I don't want to use at work, we call it the dead baby card, which is when you always go to the extreme, right? People are going to die if you don't pass this. That's not really the case here. It's really back to what level of protection and services do we want? Now, the 5 of us don't get to make that, but within our amount of general fund, right? And that is restricted, meaning, or not restricted, but it's not infinite. We don't have just control to be able to say, well, we want more money to do more things that we know we need, that we've heard in our community survey in 2014 that the community wanted. And so I think we need to have the ability to let the community decide, do they want to see a higher level of service than we can continue to provide or augment. The 7 firefighters has been a great addition, but as we know, it's not sustainable. The grant money that they're using right now to help that has done a lot of great work, but it will end in the next couple of years. And this idea of let's apply for more grants. Yeah, let's apply. Let's get as much money as we can get. But in my position outside of city council, I oversee a grant program. And I know that you can only apply for one grant program at a time. And then your chances of getting it after you're done with the grant are slim if the money's not there because other communities need their turn. So grant money is not a sustainable way for us to provide the protection and services that we need. One more thing that I just want to mention, again, I don't want to get into a lecture. I did some research. I spent a lot of time reading through 3 other cities' budgets, Rockland, Roseville, and Lincoln. And I'll share this with the group and I'll share this with the public, whoever wants to see it. But I wanted to know, what are those other cities, while they're all 3 are larger than us, what are they spending on specifically police and fire? And then how does that compare to the number of people that they have and the area they serve? And in a whole, we were at the bottom in most of those cases. But fire specifically, we, out of the other 3 cities, so out of 4 cities in the South Placer area, we spend the least amount out of our general fund on fire percentage-wise. We have almost the smallest amount of fire department costs per our area. Police is in the same boat, where we are almost at the bottom. The only one city that's lower than us is the city of Lincoln. And while they're larger by both population and by size, they have some pretty tough deficit issues as far as how they were structurally taxed and built, and they are underwater in a number of ways. And I won't get into that, but I guess the point is, Little Auburn is behind in what we need just compared to our other cities. And so I guess at the end of the day, my point here too is I think we need it. I think from a professional standpoint, I know we need it. From a personal standpoint, I think we need it. But at the end of the day, we as a community, the other, well, there's 9,000 voters, but the other 14,000 residents of Auburn, we needed to decide that. And the 5 of us can't hear from them unless we put it on the ballot. So tonight's move, it sounds like we're going to move forward, is not a move to push for a tax measure and to make people pay more money. It's, in my mind, an opportunity for the city residents to make that decision, to tell us what level of service they want. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask for a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, and what was that motion?
Hold on. I'm getting it. Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, let's get the motion on the floor first. Councilwoman Amara?
Okay.
There's 5 items, Sandy.
Yes, there are. Okay, I'll make a motion by resolution to call a general municipal election to be held on November 3rd, 2020. You wanted me to do all Or
Yes.
Yeah, I think
one
you,
at a-
you can do them all as one because they're one resolution, correct, Gary? Yes. Okay, go ahead, Councilwoman Lamar.
Second, consolidate the general municipal election with the statewide general election on the same date. 3, request that Placer County Clerk provide services for the election. 4, submit to the voters a transaction and use tax ballot measure at the election. And 5, authorize city council members to submit arguments for or against the measure.
Is there a second? Councilmember Spokely, I think you had voiced that.
I'll second.
Okay, if I can ask the clerk to please take the roll.
Councilmember Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
O'Mara,
Yes.
Mackey,
Aye.
Oakley.
Yes.
Thank you. And Mayor Berlant.
And I am an I as well. The motion passes 5-0, and we will see where we go on the next step of this. Thank you, everybody, for a very good and healthy discussion. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. And just a reminder, we will not be holding our economic recovery workshop tomorrow. We'll take that this Friday off since we have already had 2 meetings, and we will see you all in July.
Daniel?
Yeah.
Daniel, before you go, the next week is July 3rd, the day before the 4th of July. Are you going to have an economic recovery meeting that day?
Good point. Let me reach out to the 4 of you and our business owners, and I'll check in with all of you to determine that, since it is a holiday weekend, though probably many of us will be either vacationing alone or at home. But staycation. But no, yeah, if you have feedback, please email me and we can make that decision.
Thank you.
With that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. We ended at 8 o'clock. Very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.